Greetings and welcome back to Sociological Theory. Um, Hope you all are doing well. um, so I got a few emails, not a lot though. Um, I think out of this class, maybe one or two about anything related to the layout of the course, and it seems like it was pretty straightforward. Like I said, from this class, maybe about one or two emails. So that's a good thing. So hopefully everything was clear in the last video and in the syllabus. And so yeah, everything is a go. Today I'm going to do a lecture, and this lecture is going to cover the origins of social theory, as well as the Enlightenment period. So we're going to talk about the origins of social theory and the Enlightenment period. It's all going to kind of be within one. So you'll see a little bit of both of those readings in there. It'll be mostly the origins of social theory. The Enlightenment period is just to kind of give you an idea of the kind of thoughts and ideas that were coming up that kind of inspired the discipline of sociology, right? So some of this may be things that you may have heard in a class or two before. Some things may be new to you. So definitely look forward to you hearing this, and then as well as responding if you want to come to my office hours or do an assignment or something like that. So with that being said, we will go straight into the to the lecture. So this lecture, you can consider this a lecture that will be for August 25th and August 20, let me see, August 25th, not 26th, August 27th. Yes. So that is what this lecture will cover. Again, both of those readings, this reading, the origins of social theory, as well as the Enlightenment reading. So let's go ahead and go to slide 2, foundational thoughts on social theory. So the first question, what is social theory, right? What is social theory? Typically, when we think about social theory, we think about Marx, Durkheim, we think about these philosophers. Sometimes we may even go back to Plato, Aristotle, what is life, the meaning of life, things like that, right? But social theory is not always as academic, right? It's not always as bourgeoisie as we might think it is, right? Or as it may be portrayed in some of our classrooms and some of our institutions. And so what I like about what Charles Lemert does with this reading is he breaks down social theory from an academic standpoint, but then he also brings out the ways in which social theory is something that has been done or that is done outside of the academy, outside of the institution. And I think that that's something that's very important. Some things I did not agree with the text was, and this is what I add into the lecture, is how far back the idea of social theory goes, right? And that it's not something that just started with the Enlightenment period. It's not something that just started with the scientific method, and if we look at it historically, can be likened to the age of European expansion, right? Because then all that does is just reiterate the centering of whiteness, right? Inside of these thought processes, inside of modernity. And that is what sociology, at least good sociology, is supposed to combat, right? So I add on, a little bit of extra, some other ideas in the lecture, and definitely it's something that we can continue to talk about. But we'll get to that in a second. So there were some parts that I would challenge Charles Lemert on, but then they're definitely a large part of what he said I thought was really good. So We'll start with this idea of, again, what is social theory, and we'll break that down and I'll give you some definitions and some descriptions for it. But social theory essentially is a basic survival skill, right? It is when we ask questions, right? Anytime someone asks questions about life and or the world around them, right? That is essentially what social theory is, right? And so if we well, we'll get to that in a second. So social theory, yeah, again, is anytime you ask questions about the world around you, about life. And so it allows us essentially to make sense of the world in which we live, right? Why do things happen? Where do things happen? Anytime we have an idea or a thought or a question about something that is happening to us. And typically when we think about how we live and when we think about the world in which we live, most often we're thinking about some type of interaction between people and their environment, interactions between the environment and the people, right? And so anytime we're thinking about that and we're questioning that, that is essentially what social theory is. And so social theory allows us to make sense of the world in which we live. And so the question then is, well, what was your first earliest social theoretical question, right? Or thought? I will we can read this first paragraph, or not first paragraph, the second paragraph together, or I'll read it to you. And it says, Charles Lamert says, when one of my sons was at elementary school, he came home one day with questions that led to some good social theory. After he spent his first 2 school years in an informal, somewhat countercultural school, we moved. He was then enrolled in a more traditional public school. Thus began a more lively and sociologically interesting line of dinner table talk. He observed, for example, that when his class marched from its classroom to the lunchroom, the boys were told to form one line, the girls another. The march itself was under a code of silence. Having grown accustomed to schools with few rules of any sort, my son found this strange. At dinner, he reported this exotic practice with the ironic question, what was this for? Do they think we are going to attack the girls? So this idea that his son was in elementary school and noticed that the girls were in one line and the boys were in another line, and they had to be quiet, and there were these regulations around how they were to move based on gender, he asked this question, well, what does that mean about me? And what does that mean about them? And what are the implications? What are the larger meanings around keeping boys and girls separate, right? And that then leads to further social meaning and social thought that can lead to, well, what does it mean to be a boy and what does it mean to be a girl? And what type of limitations do I have as a boy and what type of limitations do they have as a girl? And what happens if we cross over, right? And so these are the questions that then get asked, and this is what social theory is, right? And so what Charles Lamert is arguing is that social theory does not just start with the academics. It doesn't just start with the bourgeoisie. It doesn't just start with the so-called philosophers, but it starts with the people. Social theory essentially starts and, I believe, ends with the people, the regular common people. All of these things are social theory. And so we practice social theory. And we have, as people, since we were born, since we were kids. And so again, my question to you is, what was your first or earliest social theoretical question or thought, right? And so as I was thinking about this question, I thought about myself. And I said, well, what was probably my first social thought or theoretical question? Or earliest one maybe. We probably, I don't know if we remember our first one, but our earliest one. And I actually don't know. I guess there are some different ones I could think of from maybe elementary school. But I do remember, I remember a picture, right, of my mother. I saw it in my baby book, like back when I was a teenager or something. And it was a picture of me. I was like 4 years old and I was dressed in my mother had a hat and she had heels. And so I went in her closet and I put on the hat and I put on her heels. And I guess my mother or my father thought it was funny. So they took a picture, right? And I remember asking them, was this funny? How did you all feel when I wore this? And I remember they said, "Oh, we thought it was funny." And I asked them the question. I said, "Did you all?" Because of course, sometimes when parents, especially during that time, this is like the 80s and the 90s. So during that time, parents would be deathly afraid. That's a very heteronormative time, and so there are lots of examples of parents beating boys, beating girls if they act like the other gender or sex, if they show signs of homosexuality or show signs of anything outside of heteronormativity. Those were times where a kid could get beat or ostracized or punished for doing that. And so I remember asking them, I said, "Were y'all worried? Did y'all think I would be gay or something like that?" And they said, "No, nobody was thinking that. In fact, we thought that you were doing that, you were wearing your mother's clothes because you loved your mother, right? And so, because you love your mother, you wanted to wear whatever it is that she's wearing, right? And so that's why you did it. It wasn't because of any type of gender norms, right? Or any type of gender bias, or we didn't think anything, we didn't read anything more into it. And so that I think will probably maybe be my earliest social kind of thought, in that, oh, my mother wears a hat, my mother wears these shoes. I like my mother, I love my mother. I want to be close to her. Let me wear her hat, let me wear her shoes, right? And then I have a daughter. And so I think about my daughter too. I have fitted hats. And so my daughter likes to put on my hat and wear my hat, right? And it falls over her whole face, but she likes it, right? She enjoys wearing it. Why? Because she wants to feel close to her dad. This sun is, hold on, let me see if I can uh, get rid of this. Okay, yeah, that's a little bit better. Okay, so yeah, so that is, I think that was maybe my first kind of interaction with maybe like social thought or making sense of the world around me, outside of the gender bias, right? Outside of gender norms. Um, and so I would like for you to think about yours, right? You don't have to write it down. You don't have to turn it in. It's not an assignment. Just something to think about, right? Maybe your earliest kind of theoretical question or thought, all right? Um, and so let's see. And so the key to the understanding of any society lies in the observation and the analysis of the insignificant and the mundane. So that is a quote by Bradley in the book the Chaney'sville Incident, right? And I thought that was a really interesting quote, because that's essentially what social theory does. Social theory allows us to look at things and observe things that seem insignificant, that seem mundane, but in actuality, these things can be complicated, right? These things can be complicated, and these things, when we look at things with a deeper lens, with what we were calling, you're probably familiar with this, the sociological imagination. And if you're not, if I'm saying things that maybe you haven't gone over in another class, then just let me know, and I can definitely come back. But because it's sociological theory, and I know you had a couple sociology courses, I'm assuming some of these things. But if not, just let me know. So our sociological imagination, right, allows us to see the depth in things that appear to be insignificant or appear to be mundane, right? And so this can be difficult sometimes, and the question is why, right? Well, why can this be difficult? Why can it be difficult to see things that just see regular people talking, regular people interacting, and say, wait a minute, something is wrong here, right? Something is wrong here, or something is right here, something is different, right? And that's essentially what Marx did, Durkheim, Du Bois, Weber. That's essentially what new theoreticians now do, whether you're talking about 20th century ones like James Baldwin and Toni Morrison, or whether you're talking about millennial theorists like Ta-Nehisi Coates and Michelle Alexander, right? These, what they're doing and what we do as sociologists is we take regular everyday interaction, but we look at it through the sociological imagination and we see the theory inside it to say there's something deeper that we should explore, right? And I mean, doctors do that all the time, right? Even medical doctors, they'll take a cough, or they'll hear a certain type of cough that may seem mundane or insignificant to the average person, and they'll say, "Oh, something. Oh, my collar. I thought my collar was up. Something is wrong. Something is wrong with that cough. You need to go get that looked at." And next thing you know, it's something a lot deeper, right? So people who have a higher sense of, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a PhD or a doctor, it could be any person that has a heightened sense of awareness, can see the theory, the social theory inside of these interactions. But again, sometimes it can be difficult. And the reason why is because, first of all, for three reasons. Number one, the powers that be may want to keep certain things cryptic, right? You want to keep certain things under wraps. And this could be argued by, let's say, for example, we'll probably talk about him. We may talk about him at some point, Benia Silva, who is a modern day theoretician, racial theoretician, who would argue that racism is much more cryptic now, and it appears to be something that was done away with, that was put done in the past, but actually is just as prevalent and just as present in today's society, in what he would call a colorblind racist society, than it was in the more blatant Jim Crow society, right? But because he would argue that because the powers that be want to keep it cryptic, it can be difficult to bring up racial theories. It can be difficult to convince people that racism still exists because it's not as prevalent, right? Now it's much more coded in language of class, in language, in criminology language. So instead of saying the N-word, a person may call someone a thug or a gangster. Instead of saying that a person is biologically inferior, a person may then say, well, they have an inferior culture, right? Or, you know, right, like something of that nature, right? To attack somebody's culture instead of their biology, because to say somebody is biologically inferior presents these old 19th century Darwinist kind of ideas that are very much rooted in scientific racist theory, right? And so that is things that are seen as archaic at this point. But they're the same, right? As when Black boys are called thugs, or you know, or the idea of anyone who migrates to this country from other Latinx countries, right? Hispanic countries, or countries in Central and South America are automatically seen as rapists and as murderers and as drug dealers, right? And so there are these kinds of stereotypes that are just as harmful as the very blatant racist ideas that were presented early on. So the powers that be want to keep them cryptic. The ones less likely to be in power may feel that it's threatening, right? The ones less likely to be in power may feel that if I bring up social thought, if I talk about these things, then it could threaten my life. It could threaten my livelihood. And the good that I do have, I'm scared to lose it, so I don't want to say anything. And so sometimes it can be difficult to observe and analyze things that seem insignificant or mundane. The lack of language used for what's called ethnomethodology, right? And your book doesn't talk about this, but ethnomethodology is exactly what social theory is based out of. You can consider it the methods of social theory, right? And essentially ethnomethodology is a study of the way that people make sense of their overall surroundings. So if a person comes up to you and they say, "How are you?" That's ethnomethodology, right? How are you, right? Asking questions about the interaction between people and other people, or people in their environment. And so that is essentially, again, the method that is used to participate in social theory. And so sometimes people may not talk about interaction or taboo subjects, racism, sexism, classism, all these different things, because they may not have the language. They may not know, right, what it is or how to say certain things, right? And so not having that language can cause people to say, well, I know how I feel, I just don't know how to say it, right? I think a good example of that is the much more elaborate, much more complex and deeper thoughts around gender. For a long time, nobody knew or had the language to speak and say what it means to feel like you are inside of the wrong body, right? And so for decades, nobody really knew what to say. And there are all kinds of more terms that are seen as more negative, more stereotypes, um, terms that are are not good, that were very popular during that time. Now we're expanding our ideas around pronouns. Now we're expanding our ideas around bathrooms and all of these different things so that we can continue to make sense and bring up things that seem insignificant or mundane, right? To some people, having a man and woman's bathroom, it's insignificant, it's mundane. For what? Right. If you're a man, you're going to the man. If you're a woman, you're going to the woman. But as we begin to have the language, as people begin to talk and theorize, now we can complicate this by saying, well, what about a person who is in a certain body but feels like they're in another body or identifies? What about that? And then what bathroom do they use? And how is this gender binary marginalizing those people, right? And so all of these things are ways in which we participate in ethnomethodology, and we participate in making sense of the world around us, right? So let's go to the last paragraph on page 1. And it says, and there are no children here. Alex Kotlowitz tells the story of two boys trying to survive in one of Chicago's most dangerous public housing projects. Lafayette, then age 10, said, if I grow up, I want to be a bus driver. The if suggests one of the reasons Kotlowitz took the book's title from an observation by Lafayette's mother. But there are no children here. They've seen too much to be children. This too is a social theory. And so again, when talking about race, there's a thing again. Oh, well, hopefully it'll go away. When talking about race, when talking about poverty, poverty and race and being raised in an environment that oftentimes forces people to participate in underworld, what can be perceived as criminal behavior, makes people grow up fast, makes children grow up fast, right? And so now these kids are not looked at as children, they're looked at as adults, right? Or even if you didn't grow up in that environment, if you are of a certain race, sometimes that person can automatically be seen as an adult, right? For example, I often use this example, when Trayvon Martin was murdered, there were certain outlets, although he was 17 at the time, there were outlets that said he was a man, right? And he was not. Legally, he was a boy. Legally, he was still a child. However, there was a young man some years back who got in trouble. He was about 30 years old and got in trouble for inappropriate behavior. I believe it was with some women at the Olympics in Rio de Janeiro or something like that. And people said that he was about 30 years old. And they said, well, he's still young, he's still growing. And so there's a certain boyish idea that can sometimes be a part of the privilege of being a part of the privileged class. And those who are not a part of the privileged class, those who are part of the class that are oppressed, can sometimes be forced to or be seen to have grown up or grow up fast, right? And so that's why that's called There Are No Children Here, which leads to the boy saying, and it kind of makes sense, which leads to the boy saying, not when I grow up, but if I grow up, I want to be a bus driver. Meaning, I know there's a good chance because of my surroundings that I may not live to see the manhood that I think makes sense. To be 18, 22, 25, 30, 35, I know that may not happen. But if I do, this is what I see myself being. All right, that's better. So again, everybody can practice social theory, thought, and social theory or thought, and many of the professional ones engage with social thought to a degree that far exceeds the way most non-professionals tend to engage in social thought. So the reason why, so if your response might be, well, if everybody does social theory, why are we talking about it in academia? Why are we talking about it in college? Well, yes, everybody does practice social theory. And one of the things that we're going to do throughout the semester is engage with different types of theoreticians, whether you're talking about professors or scholars or researchers, or whether you're talking about rappers or singers or painters or directors, movie directors, actors, actresses, politicians, blue collar workers, right? We're going to engage with many of these examples to essentially show that we all do social thought. However, a person who gets a bachelor's degree in sociology, a master's degree in sociology, a PhD in sociology, does engage to it to a degree that exceeds, right, what many non-professionals can do. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't talk to each other and they can't listen, and the professionals can learn from the non-professionals, but the non-professionals can learn from the professionals. And that's why people ask sociologists, that's why people ask political scientists or historians to make sense of something that is going on in our society, right? As well as they may talk to somebody who is outside of the professional role to also help make sense of it. So while we do need a Kendrick Lamar, right, we also need a Cornel West, right? We need people to make sense of this, right? While there may be a need for, you know, movies or music to make sense of the world in which we live, you also need politicians. You also need doctors. You also need thinkers to also talk to them and also make sense of the world in which we live. So the professionals tend to engage in it in a different degree, tend to bring it all together. And so there's a need for both groups, right? All right, so wow, that was a lot for the first slide. So let's go on to the second one. And so with the second one, this is just a quick activity that I would like for us to participate in. And so what I want to do is, yeah, we can do it like this. So I'm going to share this screen. And I don't know if you've ever played this before, but it's called Flushing Out Sociology. So you can either look at the screen or you can just pull it up yourself. That's the website right there. And what we're going to do essentially is we are going to practice, right, this social theory and realize that social theory happens on so many different levels, right? And I really enjoy this activity. I think it's always cool. And it's something that I do in some of my classes. And essentially, we talk about how we theorize going to the bathroom and how we use social theory when we use the bathroom. So if we are, let me see. So hold on, let me stop sharing for a second. Okay, make sure all that is going. Okay, cool. All right. So in watching this, right, if we were all together, then there would be a response. But I want you to think about this. And I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. And then answer the question for yourself, and then I'll continue talking. So if you were going to the bathroom, right, and this is generally for the men, right, for anyone who identifies as a male and has experience of going inside a male bathroom with urinals. But I do want the people who identify as women to also answer this question as well and think about this question. So if a boy was going into the bathroom, and this is the entry door right here, which urinal would the person use? Which one would the boy use? Would the boy use urinal 1, urinal 2, or urinal 3, right? So you can pause, you can think about that, and then come back. So most of you probably would say urinal 3, right? 1 or 3, but possibly urinal 3. Question is why? Why do you think the boy would use urinal 3? Urinal 3, probably because it's the one that's closest to the, or furthest away from the door. So because it's furthest away from the door, most people feel like, okay, yeah, I want to use that one because that one I have more privacy. And probably because most people use urinal 1 because it's closest to the door. So I'm going to be the smart one by using the one furthest away from the door, because very rarely do people use that urinal. And I'm smarter and it's cleaner and all of that. Well, in actuality, that urinal is actually, somebody did an experiment and found that the urinal furthest away from the door is actually the dirtiest one, because everybody uses it, because everybody thinks that that's the cleanest one, right? So, but that's typically what people would do. And most of you, if not all of you, probably answered that question in that way, urinal 3, right? So traditionally, that is the correct answer right here, urinal 3. So then let's look at another scenario. So in this scenario, boy walks into the bathroom and someone is using urinal 3. Which urinal would the person use? Would the person use urinal 1 or urinal 2? So most, if not all of you, probably said urinal 1. Why? Okay. And lots of different reasons. 1, I want space, right? Even though there are these dividers sometimes between them, it's like, I just don't want to be next to somebody using the bathroom, right? So that could be one reason. I want space. Number 2, I'm in a position that is vulnerable, right? I'm using the bathroom. I don't want to be next to someone and be in a vulnerable position, right? That could be another reason. Another reason could be rooted in homonegativity. I don't want to seem gay, right? I don't want anybody to look at me, right? I don't want anybody to be turned on because I'm using the bathroom, right? And I have my genitals exposed, right? So these are things that sometimes people may think about for whatever reason. But regardless of the reason, these things are the reasons why, some of the reasons why some people may use urinal 1. All of you probably said that, or most of you, and you are correct. Traditionally, it's just kind of this unwritten rule for guys, right? For if you grew up identifying as a boy, as a man, and society has seen you as a boy, then you probably have heard at some point it's important to keep space between the urinals, right? Somebody using this one and this one is free, and these two are free, you make sure you go to the one that keeps distance between you. Now let's go to scenario 3. Now this is where it gets a little bit more difficult. So someone is using the last one, someone's using the first one, 3 and 1. Which one do we use? Right? Some of you may have said you wait. Some of you may say you wait. Half of you may say you wait. The person might wait. Some of you may say you use it anyway. Some of you may say find another bathroom. But the fact remains is that there are rules, right? There are rules around what people will do, right? Walk out till someone leaves, go back in, right? Regardless of the fact, people follow these social rules. People follow these social theories that have been created around how we use the bathroom, right? Now, the fact remains is that at the end of the day, these social rules sometimes outweigh our biological rules. Your biology is saying, use the bathroom. What are you waiting for? It's available, use it. But the social rules say, you better not use that bathroom and stand next to 2 people, and no. And so many people will break the biological rule, even though biology says holding your pee, holding, your excrements can hurt you in the future. It can cause bladder infections and all kinds of things if you don't use the bathroom when you're supposed to, right? So you're supposed to use the bathroom, but sometimes we'll break those biological rules just to follow the social rules, just to follow the social theories. Now, my last question is, where did you learn this from? Who taught you these theories? Who taught you how you're supposed to go to the bathroom? And particularly if you're a boy, right? I'm gonna ask the people who identify as men and people who identify as women, right? So as a boy, how did you learn these things? Did you read it? Did somebody sit you down, father, big brother, mother, whatever, and say, hey, this is how you use, these are the rules for the bathroom. These are the social rules for the bathroom. Probably not. Probably not, right? Just, you probably don't even remember when you learned it. You just learned it. This is an early sociological thought, early theoretical thought that occurred early in your life, and you probably don't even remember. I knew the answers to these questions, and I don't remember who told me. I just know that this is what's supposed to be done. Now, to the women, people who identify as women, when you were girls, you knew the answer, and you may have never used a boys' restroom in your life. You may have never gone inside a boys' restroom in your life, but you knew these answers. Why? Did your mother or big sister or somebody teach you? Probably not. We just know. It's just social thought. It's just how we interact. These are just questions and answers. And somebody said this is the way to do it, so we do it, right? And so this is an example, number one, of our sociological imagination and using our sociological imagination, but it is also an example of early social thought, right? In a very, light way, but still, right? This is a part of social theory and social thought. So let's go to the next slide, origins of social theory. Okay, so, all right, so origins of social theory, right? Social theory is literally as old as humankind, right? Human beings have been making sense of the world around them for as long as they have existed, right? For a long time, we have been trying to figure out life, right? Whether you believe in the creation story, right? And you have Christian traditions, whether you believe in God and Adam and Eve and that idea, whether you believe in the Big Bang or some type of other origin narrative, we see that humans have been asking and answering age-old questions, age-old, I think it's pronounced adages, since the ancient times, right? Trying to figure out fire, right? Who is supposed to do what? The man is supposed to go out and hunt. The woman is supposed to stay home, or whatever, right? Where do we live? How do we move? Following the animals, following food in order to survive, which is, what they say is the reason why people migrated from the northern part of Russia, crossed over, what was that, the Bering Strait, over into Canada and down into the United States and blah, 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 right? Making sense of our social world, right? So since the ancient times, there are these origins of social theory, right? And this is where I kind of came in to add a little bit to what Lemert was saying, because Lemert doesn't start here. But he does do a good job of saying professional social thought, which I think was kind of his way of not having to talk about this. But I think this is interesting, because if we're going to go back to social thought, let's go all the way back. But questions like, where do we go when we die, right? Is there life in outer space, right? All these are social thoughts that have been asked for centuries and centuries and centuries. This is why you have early, you have people like Galileo, right? Who, created, well, so-called invented the telescope, but there are definitely elements of that far beyond that. This is why you have early Egyptian writings and hieroglyphics where people looked at and studied the stars, right? And asked questions about the stars and asked questions about what was beyond the seas and what was beyond the ocean and all kinds of explorers, right? So there are these questions, right? People have been asking these. Where do we go when we die? The afterlife, mummification. Is there life in outer space? Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Right? These are social theoretical questions, right? And all of these questions are examples of people making sense of their social circles, people making sense of the world around them, right? And a really good example of early social thought, origins of social theory, is early religious leaders, right? They were key examples of social theoreticians, right? Whether you are a Christian, whether you're Buddhist, whether you identify with Confucianism or whatever, right? Although these people, many of them were likened to more religious ideas or spiritual ideas, they were also social theoreticians and expanded social thought. So even if we look at, let's take Jesus, right? Who is who his teachings are who the Christian church is built upon. He not only spoke about spiritual ideas, but he also revolutionized social norms as well, right? He promoted equal treatment of women. There were a lot of the fact that he had women apostles and women followers that were very key to his ministry. That was not seen, that was not favored by the people of his time. His interactions with the so-called Gentiles or the unclean people, these were people who were seen to be enemies of his people because he was a Jew, right? And so these interactions were not supposed to happen. But there was this larger idea of love and love for all people, and him reflecting his father that made these social ideas, these ideas of class separation and gender separation, made it, or he complicated these things and he advanced these ideas, right? And so these, again, are examples of social thought, right? Even his ideas around paying taxes and things like that. This isn't a theology class, although I did get my bachelor's degree in theology. So sometimes I use religion as a way to explain things. Siddhartha Gautama, right? Who was the enlightened one? He's the one that Buddhist ideas are founded upon his teachings. He was fortunate to be born in a wealthy family. He was very, very wealthy for the first part of his life. But then after questioning the first time he saw poor people and he saw the conditions of people who were extremely poor, he said, wait a minute, this isn't right. For me to live this way and for poor people, for these people to be living like this. And so he forsook his riches, right? And he went on this quest to find true happiness, true joy, and real enlightenment. All right, Confucius, it's kind of a similar story, but these ideas, although sometimes are related to religion, were really ideas that were rooted in early parts of social thought, right? And so if we look at, let's see, let's go to page 3. And I want to read the first half of the origins of social, under the origins of social theory. It says, the surprising thing is that professional social theorists have not been practicing their trade for very long, at least not in great numbers. In fact, professional social theory has been around only for the past several hundred years, roughly since the beginning of modern times. Though it had been argued that earlier peoples did a type of social theory, the Greeks are usually cited in this regard. Social theory, as we know, it really began only in the 18th century in the various expressions of Enlightenment culture. So I notice he says professional social theory, and I guess maybe he doesn't, Charles Lamert may not see this, what we're talking about as professional social theory, even though it is social theory. What I would say he's arguing is when he's saying professional social theory, essentially he's saying the institutionalization of social thought, which would be the discipline of sociology. So in that way, I understand, but I like to go deeper, right? But in that respects, he is correct. The institutionalization of social theory, well, then again, I mean, it's not like early early universities didn't have social thought either. So I would disagree with that. But what we will say is in modern times, right? The professionalization of social thought in modern times, which is essentially after the age of European expansion. So the times where Europeans, and Western thought is starting to rule the world. Yes, he would be correct in that. Anyway, the point is, his argument is that it starts with it's argued that earlier people did a type of social theory. The Greeks are usually cited in this regard, right? As being the founding thought of this Enlightenment period, right? This Enlightenment period, the ideas that you read, or either that you read or you will read, and the reading for this Friday, August 25th, 6th, 7th, August 27th, ideas around liberation and justice and equality, and all men are created equal, and liberalism and individualism, all of these ideas, right, coming out of the Enlightenment period, are typically associated with the Greeks. However, I also think it's important. So I have my background in theology, bachelor's in theology. I have a master's degree in African American studies, and so from Clark Atlanta University. And so what we know based on George and James's research, an early Black historian, his dissertation, I think in the 1950s, argues that Greek philosophy is really stolen Egyptian philosophy, right? And when Alexander III came in and plundered Egypt, essentially what he did, you can see the chopping off of the nose of the phoenix, then came into those libraries, right? Those early libraries that were created from the ideas of what George and James calls the mystery systems. The mystery systems were these mysterious ideas and early philosophies and thoughts around life and the afterlife that were studied for thousands and thousands of years by the Egyptians, were put into these books. And these books created some of the biggest and greatest libraries in history. And Alexander III essentially came in and plundered those libraries, burned some of those books, took some of those books back to Europe, and that is how the Greek philosophy came about. And there's this kind of historical evidence that he uses throughout his dissertation, and then eventually this book called Stolen Legacy, to prove this thought. So this is why I say social theory cannot just start with the Greeks, or can't just start with the institutionalization of sociology, the departments of sociology in the 19th century. You can't just start with Marx and Weber and Durkheim and Kant. It can't just start there, even Du Bois, but it also can't just start with the Enlightenment period. It can't just start with the scientific revolution. And it doesn't even just start with the times in which the Egyptians essentially ruled the world. It has to go back as far as humankind, right? To really help us make sense of the fact that this social theory is something that we've been doing for a very, very long time. So with that being said, now that we've created the historical context around social theory, we can now talk more about what Lamarck calls the professionalization of social thought, right? This idea of professional social theories, which, if we want to use the term professional to mean people who got their PhDs in it, people who wrote extensively on it, people who taught it in institutions and as a discipline, then yes, that would go to the 19th and early 20th century. And if we think about it, really, sociology is a very, very new and a baby discipline, essentially. Very powerful, but a baby discipline. And so the question is, what is the professionalization of social theory? Where does that come from, right? And it really comes from, and so we're on the fifth slide, the Industrial Revolution. Does anybody know what the Industrial Revolution is? All right, so just think about it. And the Industrial Revolution is this time period, right, in the middle part of the 19th century, definitely towards the end of the 19th century, where it's essentially the mechanization of society. It started in Europe, and then made its way over into the Americas, right? As the United States began to become richer and richer off of free labor, right? Enslaved African people, it began to expand and grow. Um, and so as the mechanization of society and as machines begin to run the world, essentially, this is where you have what Lamert calls social disruption, right? Life was very different before this time. And so his argument is that social theory is rooted in the soil of social disruption. And the Industrial Revolution is a perfect example of this, right? So sociology emerged as a way to understand the Industrial Revolution and the way the Industrial Revolution transformed our society. It transformed human behavior, it transformed human interaction. And so prior to the Industrial Revolution, society was very much agrarian, particularly American society, very much agrarian. Not a lot of machines. You had the cotton gin. The cotton gin was a big thing at that time, but very, 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 very simple, right? Either you were a farmer, right? You were a farmer. You were someone who, you had your family, and I talk about this a little bit when I do my family lecture. But you had your family. You had enslaved people. The practice of slavery was very common at that time. And most people didn't travel more than 12 miles away from their house in their lifetime, right? So very, very simple world, very simple society. How you work or how you ate was based on what you grew. You grew, you ate, you sold the leftovers, you made money, you lived your life. Very, very simple life, agrarian society. As society began to become more complicated. And as it began to grow, and as machines and factories begin to sprout up all over the place, particularly all over Europe, now you see a mechanization of society. Now the agrarian life is not as important. Now the agrarian life is not, it's seen as antiquated. And instead of working on farms, now people are working in factories. Now people are moving to cities. Now people are sprouting to these areas where factories are because these are where the jobs are. So now we're not on the fields. Now we're working in factories and we're getting paychecks or we're getting money. And now we use that money to then live our lives, right? What sociologists ended up doing, particularly Marx as well as Weber, all of them, but Marx and particularly Weber, is looking at this and saying, wow, something's different here. Society, remember, social theory is rooted in the soil of social disruption. Society's changing. Things are getting disrupted. Men are no longer staying at home. Now they're working in factories, right? The family is not necessarily all together most of the time. Now they're this way. The women and children are at home. The fathers are at work. The family's disrupted. Wow, something is disrupted because for the most part, people were a part of similar classes, right? Of course, you always had very rich people, very poor people, but the level of inequality was not as great because the level of wealth was not as great, right? Now, of course, back in ancient times, you had people like Mansa Musa or Solomon in the Bible who were ridiculously wealthy. But for the most part, that was kind of outliers, right? And especially when you talk about early US, you obviously had rich people and you had more middle class and poor people, but the level of inequality was not as great until you get to the Industrial Revolution. Now you got folks like Carnegie and Rockefeller and all of these people, Vanderbilts, who can now, they have literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions and millions of hundreds of millions of dollars more than the average person. And the level of social inequality is just immaculate. Marx is saying this is wrong, this isn't right. And now this thing is being perpetuated in other aspects of our society. Now the proletariat is going to rise up, the proletariat is going to push back. This is going to cause tension. right? This is going to cause tension. This is going to cause class warfare, right? And so this is going to provide even more of a disruption, conflict in our society. So again, social theory is rooted in the soil of social disruption. When you see society changing, when you see the family being disrupted, when you see class elements or class equality being disrupted, when you see racial or actually, yeah, when you see race or race relations being disrupted, whether in a positive or negative way. Whether you talk about going from slavery to Reconstruction, which was good, or Reconstruction to Jim Crow, which was bad, for Black people at least, there's going to be social theory. Something was disrupted, right? Whether you talk about the Civil War and the ending of slavery, it was disrupted. We got to theorize about that. Or whether you talk from Reconstruction back to Jim Crow, it was disrupted. We got to talk about that. And so that's how we began to theorize these ideas. And that's essentially where sociology came from, and the department and the discipline of sociology came from. These early folks like Marx, Weber, Comte, Durkheim, these people began to look at society and how society's job or how things were changing and begin to talk about it. So social theory essentially was a way of explaining the differences between the modern societies and the modern times and how life was in this day and age, in the industrial time, in the agrarian time, and the traditional ones. And so the change was so drastic, it was so evident, it was so proliferating that everyone had to say something, right, about this new world, that we're living in, this new order, this new world order, essentially. And so the first form of social science, right, there's different forms of social science, and I don't think we go into theory, well, we don't go into methods in this course, but one of the methods is comparative, right? You have comparative, you have observation, you have manipulation manipulation of factors, you have all these different ways, right, in which we study and theorize about social life. And comparative was the first one. Essentially, that's what Marx and Weber and Durkheim were doing. They were just comparing modern times to traditional times, right? And so that is what happened, and that is how social theory starts. So Marx stirs the masses, right, and rouses the suspicion of authority by questioning the economic confusion of the times, right, by writing about the capitalists and the bourgeoisie, the proletariat and the, not capitalists and the bourgeoisie, well, they're the same, but the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, right, the workers and the owners, right, and he writes plenty of stuff on that, and religion as an opiate of the masses. And he writes a lot of stuff about how religion perpetuates these things. Weber's classrooms, Max Weber's early classrooms were packed with early recruits for the Chicago School of Sociology. And he wrote during Germany's transition into modernity, from Otto von Bismarck's time and how his time kind of transitioned Germany into benefiting from this industrial revolution and coming into modernity. Taking a step back with World War I, and then advancing, sort of, right? Obviously, that's quotation marks, advancing in World War II, if you will, right? Or around World War II, or led up to World War II. Durkheim was a writer for the public, right? And Du Bois, probably the earliest, he was part of the earliest bourgeoisie sociologist. He was a Black American leader who participated in the arts, and he was the one that actually brought the science to sociology, right? And some people may disagree with that, but like I just said, prior to that, Marx, Weber were more so just kind of theorizing and talking. They hadn't done any actual complicated methodological approaches to come up with these ideas. Now, they weren't wrong. Well, some people may think they're right, some people may think they were wrong, but their ideas were significant and important. But Du Bois actually tested it, right? We'll get into that later. But Du Bois actually triangulated his data, right? He actually went out and interviewed people. He actually used statistical analysis. He used historical frameworks and historical meanings in order to make sense of what he would eventually call the Philadelphia Negro and make sense of Black folks in America. And so really Du Bois, and this can be argued if you want to read the book by Alden Morris, The Scholar Denied. We're going to read a little bit of that later. The Scholar Denied talks about this. So yeah, Du Bois is the one that's bringing the first Black professional sociologist is bringing the science into sociology. So he essentially became the bourgeoisie and then brought the common experience by interviewing regular Black folks in Philadelphia and Virginia and Atlanta, and bringing those experiences and making sense of it into the academy, translating it into the language of academics and the people in, power, so that something could be done. And so again, the Philadelphia Negro is a great example of that, and essentially was the first of its kind. So, if you plan to take the sociology thing all the way and expand your library, I would highly suggest you get that text. Let's see. Oh, also what we see with the Industrial Revolution is, and the professionalization of sociology, is that these people essentially are reflecting the times. Nina Simone says an artist's job is to reflect the times. I would argue a scholar's job is to reflect the times. If you're calling yourself a scholar, if you're calling yourself a sociologist, you got to reflect the times in which you live. You got to talk about what's going on around you, right? Talking about the early social theoretician Marvin Gaye. What's going on? That's a social theory in and of itself. That's a good assignment. Maybe we should listen to that album and find the theories in it. That's a good assignment. I need to write that down. So yes, that is the job of the theorist. That is the job of the scholar. That is the job of the artist. For those who don't know Nina Simone, she's a old, was she blues, R&B? R&B. She's a classical pianist, soul singer. I would call her a soul singer. Let's see. So the Industrial Revolution essentially changed the way goods and services were produced, right? And so now, instead of farming, planting, reaping the harvest, selling, very simple, now goods are being produced at a higher rate. Services are expanding. And essentially, the exchange of goods and services, which is the foundation of the economy, causes or has these miraculous effects. Expansion of urbanization. Now, this is where you start to get big cities, right? You really didn't have, particularly in the United States, I mean, you had big cities, but now these are just urban capitals, right? Urban capitals, right? Where now all of these factories are set up because this is where all the people are. And now because all the people are here and all the factories are here, all the jobs are here, which makes more people come here. So now you have huge, metropolises, Chicago, New York, Philly, right? Eventually, later on in the 20th century, Los Angeles, right? But this is where those big urban sectors come from, Pittsburgh, right? Transformed elements of work. So now work, again, less agrarian, more mechanized. Changes the ideas of space and time. What took 6 months, a trip that may take 6 months, now only takes, with a train, a few days, right? And of course, they help to expand colonial power. So colonial power, now you have particularly European countries that are taking advantage of this modernity and taking advantage of this capitalism and saying, now we're going to use this to make more money by colonizing these third world or underdeveloped countries, right? And so with that, now you have colonialism, which takes place for another 100 years and messes up things for a lot of people. So modernity and the rise of capitalism essentially comes out of the Industrial Revolution. And essentially this causes for these philosophers to now ask questions about this and theorize about this, thus creating the discipline of sociology. And so Charles Lemur argues that there are two ages of modern social theory. First age is Marx, Durkheim, Du Bois, Weber. These are the people that challenge the singular dream of the bourgeoisie. They challenge this idea that you're supposed to find ways to make money even if it means that you take advantage of the people around you. And this is life, this is society, and this is what everybody should be trying to do. And they challenge that. They challenge capitalism. They challenge this bourgeoisie singular dream. And they look to make sense of things that were much more important. All right, that's where you get Weber's the Protestant ethics and the spirit of capitalism. Right, that's where you get that idea from. Right, we're going to challenge this notion. And so, so that's the first age of modern social theory. The second age would be, Charles Lamert says, is when Frantz Fanon, Betty Friedan, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Stokely Carmichael, C. Wright Mills, Michel Foucault, these people coming in the 1950s and 60s started to become the voices of social disruption, right? This wasn't necessarily the case in the early modern social theory, out of those people, maybe except for Du Bois. But even then, Du Bois might, at that time, wasn't necessarily really seen as being a part of the people. But definitely Malcolm X was, definitely Martin Luther King was, Stokely Carmichael. These people were seen as part of the people. Friedan, Frantz Fanon, right? Michel Foucault was definitely part of the bourgeoisie. And I'm not sure about C. Wright Mills. But these are now the theoreticians. Now the experts have to pay close attention to the common people, as opposed to the other way around. The professional theorists and the academics are now just simply translating the realities and the thoughts and the expressions of the real theorists who are out in the streets, the real theorists who are the activists, the people who are really out there doing this thing, who are really out there disrupting society and making change. Now the theorists got to listen to them. Instead of them listening to the theorists, instead of the people listening to Marx and Durkheim and Du Bois and Weber, now the theorists are like, no, we got to pay attention to them. And then we're talking together to make sense of this thing, right? And so the difference between early social theorists and latter theorists are two things, or are these particular things. One, the access to culture that supports critical thought that expanded. All right, so when you look at the early times, Marx, Durkheim, Du Bois, Weber, they came out, latter part of the 19th, early 20th century. Critical thought was not as accepted, right? Wasn't as accepted. By the time you get to Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Stokely Carmichael, it's different, and definitely now. So there's more access to cultures that support pushing the envelope and critical thought. The people engaging in this critical thought don't necessarily identify as bourgeoisie, white, male, intellectual individuals anymore. The look of social thought has changed now, right? The look of social thought does not look like what Marx and Durkheim look like. So if you look at early social theorists, pictures of them, and then you look at the latter social theorists, pictures of them, very, very different. And then millennial ones, even more. And the modern world is less controlled by a single unilateral idea that this is the way the world should be. So now we're opening up to ideas around gender, around race, around sexuality, around region, around class. It doesn't necessarily have to be this one way anymore. That's good. It still does not mean, though, that there are not still dominant ideas that still control our actions and the actions of the masses. There's still some dominant ideas that are very difficult to get away from. If you told your parents or you told someone you didn't want to get married, oh my goodness, do you want to have kids? No, I don't want to have kids. What is your life going to mean if you don't have kids? That's still, people still look down on that, right? So dominant ideas still control the masses. Having children, tell somebody you don't believe in God. That's a big thing. You tell somebody you don't believe in God, you can definitely be ostracized. There are these dominant ideas that if you say something opposite of that, people may attack you. All right. But the argument about Charles Lamert is it's not as common as it was in the past. Foucault might say something different, but we'll get there. The four common social forces that form the matrix that defines what we feel We can be our class, race, gender, and nationality, right? Class, race, gender, and nationality. With race, typically we talk about place, so you have urban. With gender, a lot talk about sexuality, so sometimes that's kind of couched in there. But yeah, nationality, place, region, ethnicity, all those things. So yes, the last slide of material is just a recap. So essentially, social theory talks about the social world. And the discourse is rooted in the common experiences of those least able to avoid the social disruption. So social theory is rooted in the narrative of the oppressed. Look at incidents in the life of a slave girl. Look at Sojourner Truth's Ain't I a Woman? These narratives, these stories, these bios, these things laid the foundation for Anna Julia Cooper's Voices from Within the South, or Voices from the South, which is the foundation of Black feminist thought. But they come from the voices of the oppressed, and we can't deny that. That's where social theory comes from. And so in the modern world, one of the most, according to Lamert, one of the most important, he says it is the weapon. I say it is one of the many weapons of the oppressed group. He calls it the weak. I don't like to call it the weak, but the oppressed is language. Using language to talk about the social world and set the stage for these social theories, the professionalization of these social theories. Language is important. Once we begin to have the language and we use the language and we use these forms of communication, that's all language is a form of communication. Then we can start to make sense of the world. And language isn't necessarily spoken. Social media is a language. Hashtags is a language. Music is a language. All different types of music. They speak to the voice of many times marginalized people, whether you're talking about hip hop or rock and roll, right? Some popular music, jazz, classical, right? Interesting ideas that come from the language of the people. All these are a part of certain cultures. Gospel are language of the people that are speaking out about their social reality. Popular readings, movies, documentaries, YouTube, TikTok. There's a language there. Good example, Donald Trump's rally. There were many people who did not agree with Donald Trump. And so when he said he was having a rally, I think it was in Oklahoma or somewhere, I can't remember. And all you had to do was just click on this thing to register. And all these people registered. And Donald Trump thought they built this whole extra because they said, oh man, these people, there's going to be so many people there. Come to find out, it was just young people playing a joke on them. And it worked. Because it was very, very few people at that rally. Right? Very few people at Donald Trump's rally, but he thought it was going to be more because the language of the youth, the language of the TikTokers said, oh, let's do this. Let him think he's going to have a lot of people, and he's not. That's language. That's people revolting. That's people using their voice through social media. So language is used to give context to survival. And survival is the prerequisite to pleasure. That was one of my favorite quotes out of that reading. And social theory makes sense of the survival in an attempt to help us forge a path towards the pleasure. Because that's all social theory is. It's helping us make sense of what we are surviving in order to get to pleasure, in order to get to nirvana, in order to get to what Marx would call, I forgot what he called it, but a sense of forgot the term he uses, but the sense of where everything is together, right? Dr. King would call it the beloved community, right? To get to that sense. All right. That is our hope. And that is what social theory does, is help us create a path to get there. So we talked about both readings. We talked about the Enlightenment around the middle part. So you can definitely go deeper into that and to the actual concepts that were the Enlightenment that made up early forms of the professionalization of social theory there. And then again, the rest of this comes from Charles Lamert's book, which is your textbook. So that is all for this lecture for this week. There are no written assignments or discussions this week, since it is the first week, but starting next week, you can, I'm pretty sure there's going to be some. There's going to be some written assignments, either written assignments or discussions or something next week. So prepare for that. Again, make sure that you are checking sociological theories Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So you're checking Monday, Wednesday, Friday. This Canvas, so you know when your assignments and things are due, preferably around the time of the class. But again, it's not forced on that, just whenever you can. That's just to let you know that around that time, I will be uploading new material, okay? So you can check on it around then. With that being said, hope you have a great week. Hope you have a great weekend. And I'll see you all, and you will see me in the next lecture video.